long before the golden sun touched the peaks of Ethiopia's highlands, long before the bustling streets of Jerusalem hummed with merchants and scholars, a story was quietly unfolding that would ripple across centuries. It begins with a queen, radiant and wise, crossing the deserts of Arabia guided by curiosity, ambition, and perhaps a divine whisper. The Queen of Sheba, known in ancient texts as Makeda, had heard whispers of King Solomon, the ruler whose wisdom was said to rival the heavens themselves. Some claimed he could unravel the deepest secrets of the universe. Others said his understanding of justice and divinity was unmatched. Whatever the truth, the Queen of Sheba embarked on a journey that was more than diplomatic. It was fated, sacred, and transformative. When she arrived in Jerusalem, the stories say she tested Solomon with riddles and questions designed to probe the limits of his wisdom. The encounters were intense, profound, and suffused with a sense of destiny. In this meeting of monarchs, something extraordinary occurred. A bond was forged that transcended politics. From their union was born Menelik I, a child who carried within him the intertwining legacies of Israel and Sheba, a bridge between two worlds. In Menelik's blood coursed the promise of kingship, prophecy, and a future that would bind continents and cultures. As he grew, Menelik's path was shadowed by destiny. The tradition suggests that his mother, knowing the extraordinary lineage he bore, prepared him to inherit more than a throne. He would inherit a story that would echo through millennia. His early years, though shrouded in legend, speak of tutelage and wisdom, of learning the sacred laws of the Israelites, and of understanding the responsibilities that his unique birth demanded. Even in childhood, Menelik was not simply a prince. He was a symbol, a vessel of a lineage that intertwined with the divine, awaiting the moment he would step into the role history had reserved for him. From these origins, the tale of Menelik I does not merely recount a birth. It illuminates a prophecy, a narrative that would later resonate deeply with Ethiopian identity, and centuries later, with the Rastafarian faith. In this chapter of beginnings, we witness the first stirrings of a story that bridges sacred lands, ancient wisdom, and a legacy destined to inspire reverence across the globe. Menelik. I did not remain a child of prophecy, merely in name. As he approached the age where wisdom and courage intersect, he faced a choice that would define not just his life, but the destiny of an entire nation. According to the chronicles preserved in the Kebra Nagast, Menelik, guided by divine insight, and the counsel of his father's advisors, resolved to leave the splendor of Solomon's court. Though he had grown amidst Jerusalem's marble halls and sacred temples, he felt the pull of a different homeland, a land where his mother's roots ran deep, where the future of his lineage awaited him. The journey from Jerusalem to the highlands of Ethiopia was no mere voyage of distance. It was a passage through deserts scorched by the sun, over rivers that shimmered with ancient light, and across mountains that seemed to touch the heavens. Each step carried a weight of purpose. Menelik did not travel alone. Tradition tells us that he was accompanied by a retinue of young men, trained in wisdom and valor, tasked with safeguarding the legacy he bore. Some historians suggest that the caravan carried treasures, sacred scrolls, and symbols of divine authority. Yet at its heart was a singular, immovable truth. Menelik's mission was to claim his destiny, and to ensure that the union of Israel and Sheba's legacies would endure. Upon crossing the deserts and entering the lands of his mother, Menelik was met with awe and reverence. Ethiopian chronicles describe a young man whose presence was magnetic, whose bearing spoke of royal dignity and divine favor. He was not only returning to a mother's embrace, he was stepping into a role that was both king and spiritual leader, destined to unite tribes, settle disputes, and establish a dynasty that would echo for millennia. The local leaders, impressed by his wisdom and the symbols he carried, rumored to include sacred relics from Solomon's temple, welcomed him as a figure of both earthly and divine authority. Central to this journey was the question of the Ark of the Covenant. The Kebra Nagast recounts that Menelik, guided by divine instruction and perhaps by the moral imperative of destiny itself, brought the Ark from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. This act was not mere theft or adventure. It was the transference of sacred authority, a physical embodiment of God's covenant with Israel, now resting in a new land. Here, Menelik's journey transcended history. It became legend, and a spiritual template for the generations that would follow. It is this moment that forms the bridge to Ethiopia's enduring identity. Menelik's arrival marked the beginning of the Solomonic Dynasty, a lineage claiming divine legitimacy and a sacred right to rule. Every subsequent emperor traced authority to him, and in this we see the seeds of reverence that centuries later would inspire the Rastafarian faith. For Rastafarians, Menelik's journey was not just historical, it was symbolic. It represented the reclamation of African dignity, the preservation of divine legacy, and the affirmation that God's covenant had traveled beyond Israel, embedding itself in the heart of Africa. From this passage, one can sense the weight of Menelik's choices. The journey was as much spiritual as it was physical, and it resonates with a timeless truth. The path to destiny is never easy, but it is necessary. And so the boy born of prophecy became the man who carried the sacred promise across deserts and generations, planting the foundation of an empire that would shape Ethiopia, inspire Rastafarian belief, and captivate the imagination of the world for millennia to come. Among the most compelling threads in the story of Menelik I is the legend of the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred chest said to contain the very tablets of God's law, a symbol of divine presence and a beacon of spiritual authority. The Kebra Nagast recounts that Menelik, guided by both wisdom and prophecy, carried this sacred artifact from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. Some narratives describe a subtle cunning in his mission, a divine strategy to relocate the ark so that it would rest in a land chosen by God for a new covenant with humanity. Others suggest that Menelik acted with the blessing of Solomon himself, an acknowledgement that the ark's destiny was entwined with the future of Ethiopia. The ark's arrival in Axum was more than a ceremonial gesture. It transformed the spiritual and political landscape of the region. In Ethiopian consciousness, Menelik's possession of the ark signified a direct link to the God of Israel, a tangible confirmation of divine favor. It was both a legitimizing force for his rule and a sacred symbol around which the nascent Solomonic dynasty could coalesce. Ethiopian traditions hold that this event marked the birth of a divine kingdom, a place where heaven and earth were intertwined, and where Menelik I became the conduit of a covenant that stretched across continents and centuries. This chapter of Menelik's story also illuminates a profound cultural resonance. The ark became a symbol not only of divine authority, but of African sovereignty and spiritual identity. For centuries, it inspired devotion, ritual, and the very fabric of Ethiopian civilization. Monasteries and temples were established to honor it. Kings were crowned with reference to its presence, and its story was preserved through oral tradition and sacred texts. In this way, Menelik I was not merely a political figure. He was a spiritual architect, laying the foundation for a faith-infused monarchy that endured for millennia. For the Rastafarian movement, the significance of Menelik I's connection to the ark cannot be overstated. The ark is seen as a divine emblem linking Ethiopia to the God of Israel, validating the Solomonic lineage and confirming Haile Selassie I as a living manifestation of that lineage. Menelik's act of carrying the ark becomes a symbolic reclamation of African spiritual authority, a defiance of the forces that sought to disconnect Africa from its sacred heritage. In reggae songs, in prayers, and in the collective consciousness of Rastafarians, the story of Menelik and the ark resonates as a testament to divine purpose, African pride, and enduring faith. Yet beyond legend and faith, historians grapple with the ark's reality. Was it ever physically transported? Or is the narrative a powerful allegory of sovereignty and divine blessing? The answer, perhaps, is less important than the impact of the story itself. Menelik I's ark journey shapes Ethiopia's identity, inspires global reverence, and bridges the worlds of history, myth, and spirituality. In this chapter of his life, we witness a young king stepping into a role of cosmic significance, carrying not only relics of the past but the hopes of future generations. And as the ark settled in Ethiopia, Menelik's dynasty took root, ready to cultivate the lands, faith, and culture that would echo across centuries. From this sacred foundation emerges the next chapter of his story: the consolidation of power, the establishment of a kingdom, and the enduring legacy that cements his name not only in Ethiopian history, but in the spiritual imagination of the world. With the Ark of the Covenant resting in Ethiopia, Menelik III's destiny extended beyond prophecy and legend. It became tangible in the form of empire. His arrival in Aksum signaled the birth of a dynasty unlike any the region had known. The Solomonic line, as it came to be called, was not merely a royal family. It was a living embodiment of divine legitimacy, a bridge between the God of Israel and the people of Ethiopia. Menelik's leadership was both political and spiritual. He was king, priest, and symbol rolled into one, guiding a nation with wisdom inherited from Solomon and insight nurtured by his mother, the Queen of Sheba. Menelik's reign was characterized by consolidation and innovation. He unified disparate tribes under a single banner, forging alliances that respected local traditions while establishing centralized authority. His governance blended the sacred and the practical. Laws were infused with moral and religious significance while infrastructure and trade flourished under his rule. Ethiopian chronicles describe Menelik as a sovereign whose wisdom rivaled that of his father and whose courage inspired loyalty among his subjects. Under his hand, the highlands became a hub of cultural, religious, and political cohesion, setting a precedent that would endure for centuries. Yet Menelik's legacy was not measured merely by conquest or governance. His true genius lay in the creation of a living spiritual dynasty, one in which kingship was inseparable from divine blessing. Each successor would inherit not only the throne, but the weight of a covenant with God, a responsibility codified in ceremonies and sacred rituals. Ethiopian identity became inseparable from this Solomonic lineage, with Menelik as its inaugural figure, a king whose bloodline carried the authority of ancient Israel, yet whose roots were firmly planted in African soil. It is in this consolidation of power that we begin to glimpse the threads connecting Menelik I to the Rastafarian faith. The Solomonic dynasty persisted for millennia, culminating in the reign of Haile Selassie I, whom Rastafarians recognize as the living heir of Menelik's bloodline. Menelik's establishment of divine kingship was not only a political act, it was a spiritual blueprint, a narrative of African sovereignty, resilience, and divine favor that would transcend centuries and inspire a global spiritual movement. In the reggae chants and prayers of Jamaica, the story of Menelik is evoked not as distant history, but as a living testament to African dignity and divine providence. Even as Menelik I expanded his realm, forged alliances, and established enduring institutions, the legend of his journey, the son of Solomon carrying the ark, uniting a nation and founding a dynasty, remained at the heart of Ethiopia's consciousness. Each village, each temple, and each ceremony carried the memory of Menelik's deeds, ensuring that his story would survive the erosion of time. By the close of his life, Menelik I had not only claimed his rightful place as king, he had woven the threads of faith, culture, and identity into the fabric of an empire, leaving a legacy that would resonate far beyond the highlands of Aksum. This foundation set the stage for the next chapter: the Rastafarian recognition of Menelik I, the divine thread connecting centuries of Ethiopian sovereignty to modern spiritual movements, and the enduring symbolism that links ancient prophecy with contemporary faith. Centuries after Menelik I carried the ark to Ethiopia and founded a dynasty rooted in divine legitimacy, his legacy found new life far across the oceans, in the Caribbean islands of the 20th century. Among the people of Jamaica, a spiritual awakening emerged, one that drew deeply from Ethiopian history and scripture. Rastafarians saw in Menelik I more than a distant monarch. They saw the embodiment of a divine covenant, a direct link between Africa and the God of Israel. The bloodline that began with Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, they believed, flowed into the modern world through Emperor Haile Selassie I, Menelik's spiritual heir. For Rastafarians, Ethiopia was not just a country. It was Zion, the promised land, the spiritual homeland of all African descendants. Menelik I's story, carried through centuries of oral tradition and sacred texts, became a symbol of hope and resilience against centuries of oppression and displacement. The ark he transported, whether literal or symbolic, represented divine authority and African sovereignty, a tangible connection to God that colonial powers could not erase. Menelik's journey, his courage, and his establishment of a dynasty became metaphors for liberation, identity, and spiritual reclamation. Music, particularly reggae, became one of the most powerful vehicles for preserving and celebrating this connection. Through the chants, rhythms, and lyrics of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and countless others, Menelik's story found its voice in the modern age. References to Zion, Ethiopia, and Haile Selassie I's lineage echoed the ancient tale of a young king carrying the ark across deserts, uniting peoples, and founding a dynasty that fused faith with governance. In this way, Menelik's legacy transcended time and geography, becoming not only a historical memory but a living spiritual force. Rastafarian teachings emphasize that Menelik I was more than a king. He was a prophet, a bridge between the divine and human realms. His life became a blueprint for understanding God's favor, African pride, and the necessity of moral and spiritual leadership. To Rastafarians, the Solomonic dynasty was not a relic of the past. It was a current, flowing lineage connecting them directly to God's covenant. The reverence for Haile Selassie I is inseparable from this history, for he is seen as the living manifestation of Menelik's bloodline, the continuation of a divine promise that began thousands of years earlier. Through this spiritual lens, Menelik I's story is no longer confined to Ethiopian history books or biblical texts. It is a living, breathing narrative that informs culture, music, faith, and identity. Every chant, every prayer, and every celebration of Rastafarian heritage carries the echo of a boy born of prophecy, journeying across deserts bearing the ark, and establishing a dynasty destined to inspire not only a nation but a global movement. In understanding Menelik I, we understand a profound connection between past and present, between Africa and its diaspora, and between legend and lived spiritual experience. This foundation of faith, culture, and history now prepares us for the final chapter, a reflection on Menelik I's modern reverberations, how his story continues to inspire identity, pride, and spiritual awakening across the world today. Today, the story of Menelik I is no longer confined to the pages of ancient texts or the whispers of Ethiopian elders. It lives in the hearts, minds, and voices of millions around the world. In Ethiopia, his legacy is tangible: the Solomonic dynasty, the rituals surrounding the ark, and the enduring pride of a people who see themselves as custodians of a sacred heritage. Menelik I's influence is woven into the very identity of the nation, shaping culture, art, religion, and governance for generations. His story reminds Ethiopians, and the world, that history is not only about rulers and battles but about vision, faith, and the courage to claim a destiny written in the stars. Far beyond Ethiopia, Menelik I resonates as a symbol of African pride and spiritual sovereignty. In Jamaica, and across the global Rastafarian community, his narrative forms the backbone of faith, art, and social consciousness. The reverence for Menelik and his lineage inspired a movement that celebrates African heritage, resists oppression, and seeks spiritual connection with God through history and culture. Reggae music, with its lyrics of liberation and divine justice, echoes the journey of a boy born of prophecy, who crossed deserts to claim a covenant that was both sacred and timeless. Every rhythm, every chant, and every prayer carries his story forward, reminding listeners that Africa's spiritual and cultural legacy cannot be erased. Menelik's influence also sparks dialogue about the intersections of history, myth, and faith. Scholars continue to debate the historical veracity of the ark's journey, the exact lineage of the Solomonic dynasty, and the political realities of ancient Ethiopia. Yet these debates only reinforce the enduring power of the story. Whether literal or symbolic, Menelik I embodies a bridge between the divine and the human, between past and present, and between Africa and the wider world. His story proves that history is not merely about what happened. It is about what we carry forward, how we interpret it, and the hope it inspires. In this way, Menelik I's tale is timeless. It teaches that destiny is earned through courage, wisdom, and vision. It shows that faith can shape nations, and that stories, especially those rooted in divine purpose, can transcend centuries, continents, and cultures. From the ancient streets of Jerusalem to the highlands of Axum, and from the chants of Ethiopian priests to the reggae beats of Jamaica, Menelik's journey continues to ripple across the globe. As we reflect on the untold story of Menelik I, we see more than a king, more than a son of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. We see a living legacy, a reminder of the power of heritage, the resilience of faith, and the enduring connection between Africa and its diaspora. Menelik I's story is not just history, it is a beacon, illuminating the paths of identity, spirituality, and pride for generations past, present, and yet to come. In honoring him, we honor the unbroken thread of human courage, divine purpose, and the sacred promise that binds us all.